Welcome back. We're continuing our coverage of Hispanic Heritage Month this morning. For about 15 years, our Mireya Villarreal has been on the front lines of the immigration story. She's been covering every angle of this issue on both sides of the southern border. Well, this morning, she reflects on the values that have guided her reporting.
In April of 2018 in Tijuana, Mexico, we were reporting on this large caravan of migrants, asylum seekers. It was unlike anything I had ever covered before, but I figured we'd be done with the story in a few days.
Watch the caravan. Watch how sad and terrible it is.
I soon found myself in the middle of what was quickly becoming the nation's most polarizing issue, and I resisted. Honestly, I was secretly hoping I'd get assigned to something else. I didn't want to be the correspondent covering this issue just because I was Latina or I spoke Spanish. I kept thinking to myself, I'm better than this. And then family separation hit.
A newly opened tent city along the Texas border is at the heart of the national immigration debate.
We will not tolerate. This is not okay.
Despite several requests, we are not being allowed inside the Tornillo facility. Family separation was the Trump administration's way of aggressively dealing with these immigration issues. Federal agents were instructed to pull families apart. The message was clear to these asylum seekers. Don't come here or this will happen to you. This time, I didn't resist covering the story. Covering these stories as a new mom was very difficult for me. I had a 2-year-old boy at home, and I'd be gone for weeks at a time. But I kept telling myself, this is where I need to be. To this day, I still think about 3-year-old Sophia and her grandmother, Angelica. They followed the rules, and that little girl was still pulled away from the only family that she knew and placed with complete strangers. 3 months later, they were reunited. The damage was already done. 2 behind me right now, 3 in the brush. As a journalist, I tried to stay objective as possible, but I also made an effort to add perspective to these stories that no one else could. For me, this wasn't about politics. It was about adding humanity to the stories we were telling about people that were actually stuck in the middle of the politics.
¿Qué es su nombre?
Derek.
Derek? Yo soy Mireya.
By far, the hardest part for me has always been talking to the children. As a journalist, I want to know how they got to the border, who brought them.
¿Quedar con ella?
But as a mother, and really as a human being, I just want to know that as they're walking away into the dark, that someone is watching over them. But after years of covering these immigration stories, I realized that the people who care about these stories aren't always Latinos. A perfect example is the producer who often works with me on these stories. His family is from India, he lives in New Jersey, and yet he is with me on these stories at a moment's notice when I ask. He, like me, takes great care with the reporting because this is a migration issue, a people issue, and not just a Hispanic issue. Latinos are a proud, hardworking, passionate group of people. We aren't a monolithic group, and our story is way bigger than the border. And there's no better example of that than the roster of Latinos I get to call colleagues, mi gente. Cubans, Puerto Ricans, people from Latin America, Mexican Americans. And while we may all be different, we all have this one common goal, and that's to represent our culture with respect, dignity, empathy, and corazón.
Man, I mean, Mireya is so, first of all, her coverage is terrific along the border. And secondly, she's right when she says this is a human story. It's a story of migration. We're all descended in some way from migrants. And the only difference between the people on the border today and many families that came here in the 1800s or the 1700s, the only difference is time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, working in this space, there's stories that fall on our lap, and we tell them because of our jobs.
Right.
And then there's stories that our heart tells us that we have to cover. And for Mireya, this is one of those.
Yeah, just watching that, I mean, you couldn't help but, I mean, Mireya is such a real person, love her. I think that was a great piece. And you just understand it's difficult to cover that type of stuff. But as she said, it's humanity and all of us bringing our different, unique perspectives to the stories we cover.
And it's tough not to get lost in that humanity.
Yeah.
When you're seeing these families in so much pain, going through what they've been through. Definitely a good job.
Well done.
Great job, Mireya.